In your previous exercise, you analyzed Rudyard Kipling's 1899 poem, The White Man's Burden, in order to kind of prime your thinking for the Enlightenment idea we're going to consider today as an enabler of Globalization 1.0, which again was the globalization that occurred between 1800 and 1914. Before we jump into that, though, it's necessary for us to briefly step back to Smith and Ricardo and the type of globalization that was advocated by their ideas, and both logically and actually advocated by Smith, Ricardo, and people who agreed with them, and that was that we should have globalization by free trade, right? Specifically not by building empires and collecting colonies. Smith specifically and explicitly spoke out against colonialism, saying really, in essence, that colonies cost more than they are worth. His was not an argument of the heart against imperialism and colonialism so much as an economic argument. It simply cost more to maintain and keep control of colonies, right, to suppress rebellions, than the value of what those colonies could produce. And we see plenty of instances. This painting here depicts the Indian Mutiny in the middle of the 19th century that was costly for Britain to put down. We see here the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya in the mid-1950s, which also was very costly for Britain to put down. And then we see the French effort to hold on to their colony of what is now Algeria, right, which was costly, as we should remember, in both terms of money, but also in the lives of the colonial power, British, French, the list could go on and on. Smith argued instead, of course, for free trade, and in his mind, this should be free trade among independent states. Because remember, for Adam Smith, what is important is that trade, economic relationships, our agreements with one another are voluntary. He saw this as an easier and cheaper way of getting what you want. Don't take it by force. Buy it. Right? Trade for it with independent states and between independent states. So if not the Enlightenment ideas of Ricardo and Smith, what ideas did support globalization by imperialism and colonialism? Well, the answer is the enabling Enlightenment idea C, which I have termed for our purposes the white man's burden. And we can see this as kind of the dark side of the Enlightenment. And I realize that the term Enlightenment is in that sense misleading. So remember, as I explained earlier, Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden, is not written until 1899, which is after the Enlightenment. But the ideas in his poem have their roots much farther in history, in the Enlightenment thinkers and in the Enlightenment era. And the thinker that we'll reference specifically is Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher of the Enlightenment, and as well as those who built on Enlightenment ideas such as his. And for our example here, we will use John Stuart Mill, who, again, is writing after the Enlightenment, but is very much influenced by its ideas. So what did Kant and Stuart and Mill have to say about this? Well, Kant, in his 1798 book on anthropology, wrote a couple of things. One, he said, humanity exists in its greatest perfection in the white race. The yellow Indians have a smaller amount of talent, the Negroes are lower, and the lowest are a part of the American peoples. And he would be talking here about the indigenous peoples of the Americas. To make it more clear, and in referencing to something that he heard or a conversation with a black man, he said, "This fellow was quite black from head to foot, a clear proof that what he said was stupid." And so he's judging the man and his intellect based on the color of his skin and judging it by the fact that it's not white. Mill not writing in 1798, should be in the 19th century. Despotism is a legitimate mode of government in dealing with barbarians, provided the end be their improvement. Barbarians, he is certainly using here pejoratively. These are people who lack civilization. And when dealing with people who lack civilization, despotism is a legitimate mode of government for dealing with them. And despotism, as defined by the Oxford English definition, which we can take as giving us an understanding of despotism that would have been familiar to Mill, because I don't want to put words into Mill's mouth or meaning that he is not expressing, but despotism is the exercise of absolute power, especially in a cruel and oppressive way. So Mill is saying this kind of rule is legitimate when dealing with uncivilized people. Okay. And as you correct your notes, again, sorry for this typo in the presentation, for Mill, the date you need is 1859. So again, writing quite a while after Kant, but not that far. And we certainly should link both of their ideas to the Enlightenment. These beliefs in the superiority, on the one hand, of white Europeans as a race, but also Western, and by Western we mean European civilization, the civilization of Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. The belief in the superiority of these two things worked hand in hand to provide a rationale or justification for European states building tremendously vast empires of many, many colonies. Europeans and, as we'll see, the U.S. claimed that they were acting in ways meant to help, to bring benefit to the inferior peoples that they would conquer and then rule over. For example, at the time he said it, he was future U.S. president. He's, of course, actually been dead for quite a long time now and is a former president. But William Howard Taft said that our little brown brothers, and here he's referring to the people of the Philippines depicted in this political cartoon, right, that our little brown brothers would need 50 or 100 years of close supervision to develop anything resembling Anglo-Saxon. And by Anglo-Saxon, he means white British people and those descended from white British people, like the Americans. Anything resembling Anglo-Saxon political principles and skills. And so we were going to need to look after our Filipino little brown brothers for half a century or perhaps an entire century in order to help them get even close to our level of civilization. Not a flattering depiction of the Filipino people. And as you saw in Kipling's poem, Europeans saw imperialism and colonization as acts characterized by several benign and even noble qualities. First, these acts were done by Europeans' finest people. And as he says, send the best ye breed, and referred to them as your sons. Right? So these are the best of your sons that we're going to send out to administer the colonies, right, and civilize the rest of the world. And it's done selflessly. It says that these actions are done to seek another's profit, right, and work another's gain. He's saying that all of this is going to be to the profit of the colonized people. Depicted in this image, right, Cuba, right, who has been longer colonized by the United States, and look how well they're doing in this image. Right? And the other depiction here is of a Filipino, right, looking at awe at just how far the Cubans have come, right, under the rule of Uncle Sam. Right? So this is all for their benefit. We're not doing it for our profit or our gain. Right? It's being done for the profit and gain of the colonized people. And he refers to the work of colonization as the toil of the serf. And as we know from what we've seen before, when we learned about feudalism, serfs are the laborers even lower than peasants. So the toil of serfs and sweepers to build The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. So this is stuff that some of them will never experience, the fruits of their labor, the ports for shipping that they will never enter, the roads that they will never walk upon will all have come from their selfless efforts. And it's not just done selflessly, it's also done at high cost. He says, go make them. And when he says go make them, he's talking about the ports and the roads and the other improvements for the colonized peoples. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. So people will go to this mission of civilizing the rest of the world, and they will die along the way, right, contributing to this noble cause. And he also notes that this is done without gratitude. The colonized people will not be grateful for this, and they will not help. And for Kipling and for the Enlightenment thinkers, right, that have given some of these ideas to European culture, right, these are, again, inferior colonized people, right, as depicted here, right, where the Spanish monarchy, right, civilized but old, right, and weak, is trying to hang on to the Filipinos and the Cubans, right, who are not depicted graciously, especially in the case of the Filipino. Right? They've got a stone tool on a stick, right, held on with leather thong, right, and a crude knife. So the people are referred to as half devil and half child. This is certainly the half child, at least, depicted here. And they are characterized by sloth, right, or laziness. Right, and heathen, right, not believing, not cultured, not civilized folly. Right? So folly being, carelessness, right, sloppiness. I think you get the picture. Right? So sloth and heathen folly bring all your hopes to naught. Right? No matter how hard you try, the laziness and the heathen folly of the colonized people will make it so hard for you to achieve your goals of helping them. And last here, the blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. And so the people that you're improving, that you're bettering, the people that you are guarding will blame you and hate you. The cry of hosts ye humor. Right? And humor here means to indulge somebody, to put up with them. Right? The cry of hosts ye humor off slowly toward the light, and of course the light being that enlightened Western civilization. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Now, this reference here is biblical. He's hearkening back to the Israelites, that in the Passover tradition of the Jews and of the Old Testament Christian Bible, the Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt and brought out of Egypt by Moses, who was acting as God's messenger and appointed leader of the Israelites. He's brought them out of slavery in Egypt, and yet they're not grateful to him bringing them out of slavery. Right? They complain to him. They say it would have been better if you had left us in Egypt. And Kipling is saying that the colonized people are much the same. Right? They're not grateful for having been brought out of their less enlightened, more barbaric ways. They wish, and they tell the Europeans that they wish they'd just been left in their condition of slavery and unenlightened condition. And we see this also depicted not just in poems, but also in political cartoons, right, and propaganda of the time. Right? This is a cartoon about Britain's imperialism. This image symbolizes both Britain as the character of John Bull, and it's quite possible you don't recognize John Bull. That's not really a political, cultural touchstone in the United States. But Uncle Sam, right, you surely do. So both of their efforts at civilizing through imperialism. Same here, again, with Uncle Sam, right, and the civilizing mission. And so these racist views, right, built on some Enlightenment ideas. My point here is not to discredit the entire Enlightenment, not by any means. But we do have to acknowledge it has a dark side here. So these racist views, which again are built on some Enlightenment ideas, helped to drive the growth of ever bigger empires. And as you can see that in this image, right, as they grow throughout the 19th century. Remember, they had shrunk right, at the end of globalization, or at the end of the age of imperialism and the age of discovery, but they've grown. By 1938, they're there, they start to taper off. Still some left by the 70s, but by 2007, virtually gone. And again, we pick up at 1492, when the age of discovery or age of exploration begins. We see the building of empires in the New World. Remember, they're still very small throughout Asia and Africa, mostly coastal. It's 1754, kind of the peak of colonization in America. 1822, of course, that has fallen away. Right? The end of imperialism's first wave is over, but 1885 right, to 1914, right, where globalization 1.0 ends, right, we have hit really that peak of globalization. Let's move on to the next image, which is a freeze frame of that 1914 state, right, when the United States is also at this point an imperial power, controlling the Philippines, for example. And you can match the European powers to their different colonies. French blue, England is the red here, right? Italian, and we'll also see German colonies, German East Africa, German Southwest Africa, for example, Cameroon. That's the state of things. That concludes our look at enabling Enlightenment ideas. Please make sure that you've completed your notes and uploaded them to this assignment, and I look forward to seeing you in class.